Hello and welcome to the first ever ADHDvCon, brought to you by the Monoceros Initiative, a pending nonprofit.
My name is Lynn, and I'm an ADHD coach, podcaster, and speaker, as well as the president and co-founder of the Monoceros Initiative.
And I'm Ron Capalbo, ADHD coach, educator, content creator, podcaster, and co-founder of the Monoceros Initiative.
ADHDvCon was born out of a need for growth and innovation in the ADHD space. As ADHD awareness and diagnoses have grown the past few years, we saw an opportunity to showcase ADHD content outside of the standard conference and talk formats. The ADHD experience goes beyond one gender, one sexuality, one age group, one race, one ethnicity, one nationality, and one type of neurodivergence. It's about time for those other experiences and voices to be heard.
All presentations are under 25 minutes and optimized for ADHD brains. Our fair selection process is based on final video content, which allows us to guard against misinformation and allows those new to speaking to get their chance to shine.
Thank you for supporting us in our inaugural ADHDvCon. Here's how it will go. We will have a live stream link for each day of ADHDvCon. The live stream description will have the times each presentation will air, as well as a general time Q&As will start. There is a Q&A area of the live stream window that allows you to enter questions you'd like the presenters to answer. For our shorts programs, all shorts for each program will play back-to-back with one collective Q&A after all shorts have aired. Questions can be directed toward all of the presenters or to a specific presenter in the shorts Q&A. Each day's programming will be available to watch afterward on our YouTube channel.
We also hope you'll stick around for our info sessions on Starboard and the Monoceros Initiative at the end of day 2 and 3. At the end of day 2, we'll be announcing our 4th Starboard, an ADHD collaboration cruise. And during Shorts program number 4 on day 3, we'll be sharing more about the Monoceros Initiative.
Lastly, we wanted ADHDvCon to be accessible to everyone, which is why we made it free. But it isn't free for us to put it on. If you have the means and desire to do so, please support us in our cause by donating to the Monoceros Initiative. A link to our donation page is in the description of the live stream. If you have any questions about ADHDvCon, shoot us an email at monocerosinitiative@gmail.com.
All right, so let's get on with the programming.
Hello, ADHDers. My name is Becca, and today we're going to talk about how you can power up your ADHD brain with protein. Protein is not just for building our muscles. It does play an important role in our energy levels and our brain function. So let's learn about that today. But before I get started, here is our agenda. I'm going to share a little bit more about who I am. Then we'll talk about what protein is, why it's important, how much you need, what foods contain protein, and then 6 tips for making sure you are getting in enough protein. So if you don't know me, my name is Becca King. I'm a registered dietitian and I'm a certified intuitive eating counselor. I'm also an ADHDer, so I have lots of personal experience with the challenges that come with eating yourself when you have ADHD, but I help other ADHDers who primarily struggle with binge eating disorder and disordered eating learn how to work with their brains so they can heal their relationship with food and discover a way of eating that's going to make them feel their best, both mentally and physically. And I do this using the intuitive eating framework, which is a non-diet self-care framework for eating. And I also use neurodiversity affirming principles. In my virtual private practice, I do small group coaching and private coaching. And you can find me on social media at ADHD.nutritionist. I'm most active on Instagram and Facebook and Threads sometimes if I'm in the mood. So let's start with the basics of what protein is. It's a macronutrient. So we have 3 macronutrients: protein, carbs, and fat, and they each play a key role in our body's functioning. When it comes to protein, they're made of amino acids, or protein is made of amino acids, and these are essential for growth, repair, and our overall health. Protein is involved in pretty much all of our body systems, but one of the most important ones for ADHDers is it plays a role in our neurotransmitters like dopamine. And that will be a nice segue to why protein is important. So we'll start with this middle one here with neurotransmitter production. So When we eat protein, it provides the building blocks or amino acids to make neurotransmitters, which are basically just brain chemicals that help send messages between our nerve cells. For ADHDers, we have lower levels of dopamine, which is one of our neurotransmitters. This is a very oversimplified explanation of it, but that's kind of how I like to explain it. So when you eat protein, it will help your brain make more dopamine, which can help with emotional regulation, attention, and impulse control. Protein is also important for helping us feel full for longer. So it triggers our satiety hormones, and then it also reduces our hunger hormones. So let's say you had an apple as a snack. There's nothing wrong with having an apple as a snack, but it's probably not going to hold you over for very long. So maybe you add a protein source in there, because an apple's a carb. So let's add a protein in there. Let's say we have some Greek yogurt with it, or we have a cheese stick with it. And for someone who doesn't do dairy, maybe you have some deli turkey with it to hold you over. That would be a much more satiating snack than just having the apple on its own. And then the last reason that protein is important is blood sugar regulation. So when we eat carbs, particularly simple carbs, if you don't know what simple carbs are, these are just carbs that are either low or contain no fiber. So sugar would be an example. Regular pasta, white rice, white bread would all be examples of simple carbs. These tend to peak and crash your blood sugar. And that can exacerbate ADHD traits. So when you are able, so when you eat simple carbs, it's going to peak and crash your blood sugar, right? And when that happens, that exacerbates ADHD traits. So when people say sugar is bad for ADHD, it's not the sugar itself, it's just the impact it has on our blood sugar. And that doesn't mean that you can never eat simple carbs, because that's unrealistic and I'd argue unnecessary. It's more so what you can pair with those simple carbs, which would be protein, to help prevent big blood sugar fluctuations. You can also add fiber in there too. But since we're just talking about protein, we'll focus on that today. So when you, let's say, have pasta and you add a meat sauce in there, that's going to keep you full for a lot longer than just eating a bunch of noodles on their own. So when you pair carbs with protein and you have a more stable blood sugar, you're probably going to experience a more stable mood, more stable energy levels, and you might even experience more mental clarity, which is great. So how much protein do ADHDers need? The general guideline is 0.8 to 1.0 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. We use kilograms in nutrition, not pounds. Or dietitians do, I should say. And then for ADHDers, it's 1 to 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. Some things that might influence how much protein you need are going to be your age, activity level, and gender. So if you are someone who does a lot of weightlifting or a lot of vigorous physical activity, you're probably going to have higher protein needs than that 1 to 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. If you're unsure about what your protein needs are, I would highly encourage you to seek out a registered dietitian so that they can give you individualized advice on how much protein you need, and they will make sure that they're giving you evidence-based advice. But if you want to learn how to calculate your protein needs, this is the equation that we use as dietitians. So first you need to get your weight. If you are American, you probably know your weight in pounds. So we got to divide that by 2.2 to get your weight in kilograms. Then you will multiply that weight by 1 and 1.2. So I have an example here. Let's say a person weighs 180 pounds and you divide that by 2.2 to get 82. So their weight in kilograms would be 82. Then you'd multiply that by 1, which is 82. And then you'd multiply that by 1.2 and you'd get 98. So for a person who's 180 pounds, not considering their age, activity level, or gender, they're going to need somewhere between 82 to 98 grams of protein per day. I like having a range for protein because I think it adds some flexibility in there, and it acknowledges that our bodies don't burn the same amount of energy every day. How much protein we need is going to vary slightly on a day-to-day basis, and that's okay. So there's two main categories of protein sources. We've got our animal proteins, and then we also have plant-based proteins. Right now, we'll focus on animal-based proteins. These would be lean meats, seafood, eggs, and dairy. So anything that, you know, swims in the ocean or walks on the earth. Technically, eggs and dairy are two separate categories. I just lump them together because we usually do, because they're in the same spot in the grocery store. But the big difference between animal proteins and plant-based proteins is that animal proteins tend to be more complete proteins. And this just means they provide all the amino acids, essential amino acids our bodies need. Essential means that our bodies cannot make them, so we need to get them from our diet. Plant-based proteins are more incomplete, and that just means that you need to pair them together in order to make sure you're getting all the amino acids you need. A great example of this would be rice and beans. That combination, which is like a staple food in a lot of cultures, can provide you all the amino acids that you need. When it comes to plant-based sources, we've got legumes, nuts and seeds, whole grains, and soy products. And I just want to touch on a couple of them because I think people are more familiar with animal-based proteins than plant-based proteins. Lentils are awesome. They're really high in protein and fiber. Chickpeas can be great roasted, or you might eat them if you like hummus. That would be a way that you get in chickpeas. Green peas are also a legume, as well as any kind of bean that you eat: black beans, kidney beans, pinto beans. When it comes to nuts and seeds, I just want to note with these that I often see on social media people thinking that nuts are like a high protein food. They do provide protein, but they're really more of a fat than they are a protein. So like per ounce of nuts, you're going to get more fat than you are actually getting a protein. So just something to be aware of, that nuts are very nutrient dense, which is great because if you don't have much of an appetite, sometimes a handful of nuts is going to probably give you a lot more fat and protein and minerals that our bodies needs, which can be great. Quinoa is a fun whole grain. If you've never tried it, it's simple to cook. It takes like 15 minutes. And it's good hot or cold, which I enjoy. And then soy products would be tofu, tempeh, seitan, edamame, which you can get dry roasted, which is great as a little snack, or you could get the little steamer with like the pods. I add edamame into stir fries as a way to get in extra protein. And when it comes to tofu, I try to find marinated tofu so that I don't have to like press the tofu to get the liquid out and then wait to marinate it and all of that. I just find, especially Trader Joe's has like a sriracha tofu and it's really yummy. Pop it in the air fryer and have nice crispy tofu. But here's some more tips to get in protein, including it at your snacks when you can, especially if you're someone who feels like you're always hungry and you're always grazing. I would reflect on what type of snacks are you eating? Are you eating a lot of carb-based snacks? Can you pair those snacks with a protein and then try and take note of how you feel when you do that? So maybe it's doing pretzels with hummus, or an apple, again, with like Greek yogurt. I'm on an apple kick right now. So yeah, adding some hard-boiled eggs would be another easy protein snack. I like to put a little sriracha or everything bagel seasoning on my hard-boiled eggs to add a little flavor in. Starting your day with a protein-packed breakfast. So when it comes to those neurotransmitters that protein helps provide the building blocks for, it can help trigger our alertness neurotransmitters. So I've often seen in the ADHD space, people say start your day with protein because it can kind of help wake your brain a little bit. So trying to have a higher protein breakfast, that's also going to help keep you full for longer in the morning too, which is really nice. Some high protein things that I do at breakfast would be like Greek yogurt. Cottage cheese is a really easy one. I do that on toast, which might sound weird, but it's delicious. And everything bagel seasoning. Smoked salmon would be another one that's high in protein. You can always use tofu and scramble it up to make like your own version of like scrambled eggs that's plant-based. Including it at every meal. Ideally, all three of our macronutrients, when you have a meal, we want all three of those at a meal. So protein, carbs, and fat as well as fiber, which would be like your fruits and vegetables. I always like to say, for the most part, that is kind of like the components of a meal. But in reality, there might be times when you don't have access to those types of foods. You don't have the appetite or the executive function to make something that has all of these components, and that's okay. But that's something maybe for the most part we work towards, or getting to a place where most of your meals look like that. Then finding no-cook proteins. So this just makes the barrier to eating proteins as low as possible. So I probably already mentioned these, but Greek, like single serve Greek yogurts or cottage cheese, cheese sticks, nuts, tuna pouches, or the little chicken pouches are great no-cook protein sources. I have a guide that I will provide for folks, or a link to it so you can download it. That has 20 no-cook animal-based proteins and plant-based proteins, and then how you can incorporate those into some meals and snacks. Then also looking for foods with added protein in it. So foods that maybe don't traditionally come with protein, but they've added it to make it more nutrient dense. Protein pasta is probably my all-time favorite in this little category. I have yet to have a client who's tried particularly the like Barilla Protein Plus brand and said, oh, this tastes gross, or this isn't like regular pasta. They're like, I can't even tell the difference between, if you made me regular pasta, like Barilla pasta, and the Barilla Protein Plus, I wouldn't be able to tell the difference between the two. And the nice part is you get like 20 grams of protein in per serving with that pasta. So even if you made no other protein with it and just had buttered noodles, you would get protein, carbs, and fat in at your meal, which I think is really cool. So looking for things that do have a little bit of protein in. I would also add with no-cook proteins, like protein shakes are great, especially when you don't have much of an appetite. That can be awesome. Then the last one would be trying frozen, pre-marinated, pre-cooked protein options. These just make, again, getting protein in more accessible for you. So this could be, with frozen, I get frozen pre-cooked chicken strips. With pre-marinated, I mentioned the tofu. I do that with chicken as well, or like rotisserie chicken would be a pre-cooked option for you. So just a little summary for today. Protein is essential for everyone, but especially ADHDers. It helps with our energy levels, making dopamine, keeping our blood sugar stable, and helping with emotional regulation. Here is my website, as well as my handle and email. So if you have any questions, feel free to send me a DM or an email, and I'd be happy to answer. And if you go to my website, I do have a link to book a discovery call with me if you'd want to chat with me and learn about my services and see if we're a good fit to work together. So thanks for attending my chat.
Hello and welcome to the Q&A for Power Up Your ADHD Brain, the Protein Connection. I'm Ron, and I'm here with registered dietitian and certified intuitive eating counselor, Becca King. What's up? Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to chat.
This is something that I just thought of. I know we talked a little bit about what we might chat with, but I was just like, okay, explain to people what intuitive eating means.
Yeah. I'll give you the definition, and then I'll give you how I like to explain it. So awesome. Intuitive eating is basically a self-care framework, and it integrates instinct, emotion, and our rational thought. So it's a non-diet approach to nutrition. So the goal of intuitive eating isn't to necessarily lose weight like most diets that we think of, but more so how can we nourish our bodies in a way that feels good for us, both mentally and physically. And it's something that we can do probably we can do the rest of our life. But I'll usually explain it as removing the shoulds from eating and figuring out what works best for you to feel your best mentally and physically. And that looks different for everyone. So
I love that. I always say that when people are using a lot of shoulds, I'm like, you're shitting all over yourself.
Yep.
Okay. So a couple questions for you. I've heard of a lot of things as an ADHD coach, and some of the things, it doesn't feel right, but there's a lot out there about skipping meals or intermittent fasting, or
Yeah.
cutting out carbs, or cutting out like a food group, right?
Yeah.
Everyone seems to be like, this is going to end your symptoms.
Yeah.
What's your thought on that?
The science doesn't really support it is what I usually like to say, because we don't really have any research on it, and like someone's personal experience is not necessarily the same as like doing an actual study and seeing, does this actually make a difference or not? And if it works for someone, that's great. But often, especially with binge eating and that being something a lot of ADHDers struggle with, intermittent fasting is not recommended if you have a history of like disordered eating or an eating disorder. So like if you do binge eat, a lot of times that style of eating, because you're skipping breakfast, which is a big pattern I already see with my clients, is like skip breakfast, or they don't barely eat all day and then binge eat at night. So it kind of like, they're like, oh, logically, like, oh, it's kind of already how I'm eating anyway, so I might as well just do that. I'm like, okay, well, it's not going to stop the binge eating at night if we just keep skipping breakfast, you know?
Right. Okay, so let me ask you about impulsive eating, binge eating, eating for dopamine stimulation. Are they all the same thing, or is it just like they're all kind of variations of it, right? There's
Yeah,
like
I think of
emotional
them
eating.
kind of like, yeah, it's all like a way to regulate in a sense.
Okay.
I kind of think of
Yeah,
like
go ahead.
emotional eating and eating for stimulation as like a little bit different, or kind of like the reason why, you know, because obviously
Sure.
like when you're emotionally dysregulated, it doesn't quite feel the same as like I'm bored or understimulated and I need something to do, versus like inside feels dysregulated and I need to like cope in some kind of way.
Okay. You were also talking just now about how you have clients that either don't know they're hungry or forget to eat in the morning, right? Like I think too, with whether it has to do with medication or it just has to do with forgetting to eat because we start doing stuff or we get hyper focused. So what is it that you recommend for someone that's dealing with that? Because I mean, from watching all of your stuff online and from the video, protein is especially important, and in the morning too. So I try to always do that. But how can I remember to do that?
Yeah. Ooh. Habit stacking is a potential option of like, is there anything you can, like, for a lot of my clients, like, well, I always have a cup of coffee in the morning, and I'm like, great, so that's a starting point. Can we maybe add like a scoop of protein to your coffee? If it's like, I'm literally not even I can't make breakfast, like, that's not even happening, or I can't even grab anything, but I can like add something to my coffee. That's a starting place. I'll start with some of my clients. Or I'm like, anything you can eat, even if it's just a banana to start to get you used to eating in the morning, is better than nothing. But yeah, kind of getting that, leaving food out so it's visible, so you see it in the morning, can be another cue. I think making things very accessible too. Like if you're not someone who's used to eating breakfast, or that's something you struggle with remembering, like lowering the barriers to breakfast. So that way, because also a lot of ADHDers, if you're skipping breakfast, you might not be much of a morning person. Like I have a lot of clients who are like, I am rolling out of bed and getting to work. So like make breakfast something that's grab and go. It doesn't, you're probably not going to make a whole spread for yourself in the morning.
I love that you said the coffee thing, because I think I saw you post about that. I know I saw you post about that. And I started doing that as like, if I don't have a chance to like stop and eat, I'll at least do that. And now even if I'm eating breakfast, I do it because I've just gotten so accustomed to it. So like every morning,
because then it's like, sweet. I've got most, for most protein powders, it's like, cool, I probably got 20 grams of protein, and just start plus whatever else if you have something else with breakfast. Like,
that's great.
Yeah.
I think the chat was on the same page as me, because the first question we got was, what's your professional opinion on intermittent fasting in regards to reducing or increasing symptoms? So that's answered.
Yeah. And I would say from a blood sugar perspective, that's the other thing I would say from that, is like eating regularly throughout the day actually helps us keep our blood sugar more stable. And that can help. That's also why protein's recommended, because that big flux in blood sugar can make our energy worse. We're more likely to be emotionally dysregulated. We might have more ADHD traits as well. So
okay. I love that. I'm like, oh, I know this stuff, and it's like, duh, because I've been following you now for like.
Yeah, that makes me happy.
I have another question, and then someone else was asking something. I'll make sure to throw on the end. But so apparently, so I'm a new dad, and I'm supposed to meal prep, and I hate it, and I don't know how else to feed myself. Right now, where self-care is going out the window. What do I do?
I'm not a huge fan of meal prep. I find it doesn't work for most ADHDers. So like, yeah, I've worked with hundreds of clients, and I've maybe had 10 that like regularly meal prep, because it's just something that doesn't quite work. Like there's a sensory piece of it of like eating leftovers over and over again. It can get like there's no lack of novelty, and it's just like sometimes spending hours in the kitchen isn't enjoyable for some people, or you don't have the time or the energy to do it too. It's like that's not.
There's also like not this, when you cook food, the reward is like
It's getting to eat it
and like enjoy it, right? And it's like, no, I just have to do all the work anyway.
Yeah, I just have to do this and put it in containers and put it away.
So what do I do instead?
I think batch cooking, like the ingredients or parts of meals, is really helpful. So like batch cooking, I'll do proteins usually, like cook up a bunch of chicken, and then I can throw it in other things. Like I can put it in a salad or pasta or a stir fry, or even put it in a sandwich or something if I need to. So there's ways I can use things. And then I also think that using shortcuts is like what I like to call them, but like convenience things like 90-second pouches of rice or frozen vegetables or pre-cut vegetables, or I'll get like herb pastes or like frozen herb cube things, so I don't have to like, buy ginger and cut it up, or mince garlic. I buy the jarred version of it to save steps. So that way, like most of my meals, I try not to spend more than 15 minutes in the kitchen making, and I'll usually make extras. So I have a little bit of leftovers, but not like a whole week's worth of like leftovers. At least for me, that's what works. And then you can like batch cook and freeze is another option. And then it's easy to kind of like pull from there. The freezer is my friend. If I could make a ADHD fridge, it would have the freezer space would be a lot bigger, because I don't waste as much food.
Wasting food's a thing with ADHDers.
Yeah.
And so like I think being able to get stuff that lasts longer or that you can freeze is huge.
Yeah.
One last thing that someone mentioned, and I think it's just kind of based on the way that we had it, but you mentioned that you would provide a link to a list of proteins.
I will make sure I send that to you.
Okay. Do you have a way that if they could get it now, or should we just have it posted on our Instagram? Because I can do that too.
That'd probably be the easiest way.
Sweet. We'll do that. Awesome. That is all the time we have for Becca. It went super fast. But if I mean, guys, follow her on Instagram. All of the greatest tips that I've had about eating over the past couple of years have come from her. So thank you so much for joining us. Just a reminder, if you love ADHDvCon and what we've been able to do here, and you are feeling like we've been helpful and have the means to do so, please make a tax-deductible donation to the Monoceros Initiative. You can go to the link in the description of the live stream. And yes, thank you for joining us. Becca, thanks for everything. And on to the next presentation.
I'm Kacey Richards, and I'll be talking about how to prevent decision fatigue. I'm an executive function coach and a speech language pathologist, and I work with a lot of people with ADHD in both of those positions. And I also have ADHD myself. As an executive function coach, I work with adults with ADHD and autistic adults on improving executive functioning skills like organizing, prioritizing, and attention, as well as the side effects of executive dysfunction, like overwhelm, emotional regulation, and decision fatigue. I feel like decision fatigue isn't talked about enough, and it can have a big impact and potentially have serious consequences. So I want to talk about how to prevent decision fatigue now. First, we're going to talk about what is decision fatigue. Then we'll talk about potential causes of decision fatigue. And I'll walk you through step by step how to reduce or simplify decisions to prevent decision fatigue. We'll talk about how to set a goal to reduce your decisions, some potential strategies that can help prevent decision fatigue, and how to create systems to reduce the amount of decisions you're making. So first of all, what is decision fatigue? Decision fatigue is the exhaustion and mental overload that is caused by making a large number of choices throughout the day and or when your decisions have a big impact or take up more mental effort. Unfortunately, our brains can't process everything all the time. We have a limited capacity for processing information and making decisions. And as we deplete our capacity for making decisions, the quality of our judgments can be impacted. We may make poor decisions once we reach the point of decision fatigue. What can lead to decision fatigue? Really, any kind of decision can cause decision fatigue. It's just the accumulation of several different decisions throughout the day. So it could be anything from deciding what to wear to choosing meals or making big business decisions. How does decision fatigue relate to neurodivergent people? So neurodivergent people often need to use extra energy and effort to regulate our attention, control impulses, regulate emotions, and organize our thoughts. This means we're depleting more energy and making more decisions throughout our day in terms of where we are going to put our energy and how to regulate our attention and all of those things. So this puts neurodivergent people at a higher risk of decision fatigue. What problems can decision fatigue cause? Decision fatigue, if it's left unaddressed or not prevented, it can cause mental, emotional, and physical fatigue. It can also cause us to make more impulsive decisions, avoid decisions, procrastinate different tasks, or make poor decisions. So what can I do about it? How do I avoid all of those consequences? First of all, once you're experiencing decision fatigue, it can be really hard to recharge and pull yourself out of it. So the best thing you can do is to prevent it in the first place. So I'm going to give you some different ways to cut out non-essential decisions, automate certain routine choices, and prioritize those important decisions so you can conserve your mental energy for those really impactful decisions. These are the steps that we'll be going through now. So first, we want to identify the cause of your decision fatigue, then determine the area of your life where you're making the most decisions, identify a goal to reduce decisions and your motivation to work toward that goal. Then we'll talk about some potential strategies that might help you prevent decision fatigue and how to simplify different parts of your life to reduce the amount of decisions you're making. And last, we'll be making a plan to reach your goal. So some of the causes of decision fatigue could be that you're making a lot of decisions every day, that your decisions might have a bigger impact on other people, or you may be in the middle of a difficult life situation or a transitional period in which you may just have more decisions to make at that point. And you may also be faced with uncertainty. Another potential cause of decision fatigue is having perfectionist tendencies. So those of us who are perfectionists often are constantly overthinking. And the more overthinking we do, the more decisions we end up making, which again can cause decision fatigue. Okay, step 2 is to identify an area of your life to address. So you can look at the list on the right of different areas of your life that you might want to consider. You can think through what area of your life you're making a lot of decisions or where you're making the most impactful decisions. Next, identify your goal and your motivation for working toward preventing decision fatigue. So first, identify what your goal is. Think about what would give you back the most time and energy. You may decide that it's the best idea to use a system to reduce decisions around meal planning, or maybe what will give you the most time and energy is to simplify your process for cleaning. Then think about if you had prevented decision fatigue, giving you more time and energy, what impact would that have? So maybe you would be able to fall asleep more easily, or maybe you'd have more energy to do things that you don't typically get to do. Last, think about how you would feel if you did not struggle with decision fatigue. You may feel more energetic, calmer, or relieved. Identifying how you would feel and what impact this would have will help you identify your motivation and stay motivated to keep working on this. Okay, here are some strategies about reducing decision fatigue. First, you might want to think about lifestyle changes. Obviously, these are more difficult to address, but it is important to consider because sleep, exercise, and self-care habits can all really help to think more clearly and to recharge at the end of the day so that you're ready to make more decisions the next day. We can also try to automate, delegate, delete, or systematize. We can also address that perfectionism if it's causing overthinking, and give yourself grace when life gets difficult. That's easier said than done, but I think it's important to keep in mind. Also, especially if you're going through a difficult life transition, you could find some ways to have some predictability, whether it's consistency in your schedule or having some familiar things that can really help to feel more comfortable and to reduce those decisions so that you're not walking around in pure chaos. You feel like you have some sort of structure or something where you don't have to make decisions. If you try some strategies and they're not working or you have no idea where to start, it may be helpful to get support from an executive function coach or a therapist. Okay, if you want to simplify an area of your life to reduce decisions, you can use what I call ADS. So this is a tool to simplify or form processes to reduce your decisions and effort. ADS stands for automate, delegate, delete, and systematize. You can think through those 4 different options to decide which one makes the most sense for you and for the area of life that you're trying to address, and which one adds more time and energy back into your life. First is automate. So you may be able to set up automated recurring grocery deliveries if meal planning and prepping is one of the areas causing a lot of decisions. You could also set up automatic bill payments or use a budgeting app or some sort of app to track different information. You may want to just turn on the radio instead of searching for the perfect playlist. Setting recurring calendar reminders can be really helpful to remember to do something once a week or maybe once a month. And not only to remember to do it, but just so you don't have to decide when. It's already in your calendar for a specific time. You can also do the same thing with recurring alarms for something that you may want to do on a daily basis or multiple times per day. The next is to delegate. Delegation can be very difficult for people with ADHD. It may be difficult because we like to have a sense of control over everything, or it may be that we feel like a burden. If you're feeling like a burden, keep in mind that in general, people tend to enjoy helping others, and people like when someone else trusts them to help with something. So more than likely, you're not a burden, and it's important to rely on your community for support. If you do really struggle with delegating, it may be helpful to start by picking something small that you can feel really comfortable with letting go of your control over, and then gradually learn how to delegate other things. You can pick different areas of your life to delegate. So if you're feeling overwhelmed at home, you may choose to split up household tasks between those that you live with, or at work, you might delegate a different project to different people so everybody's overseeing something different. If you're trying to make plans with someone, maybe you decide the restaurant and you ask your friend to decide the day and the time. Next is delete. This is probably the easiest one you can do. You may not want to do this in every situation, but if you can completely cut out some unimportant or low priority decisions, this can be really helpful, especially if you're in a certain life transition or a period where you are making a lot more decisions. it may be helpful to wear the same jewelry or the same hairstyle for a while until you feel like you can make more decisions again. Also, cutting down on social media time can be really helpful. We don't realize it, but social media makes us make a lot of decisions in a very short amount of time. We're constantly having to decide whether or not to like a post, whether or not to follow someone, whether to keep scrolling or to exit the app. So cutting down on social media can cut out a lot of decisions. You could also reduce the number of options to choose from. So if you don't want to delete the decision entirely, you could at least reduce the amount of options so that that decision isn't as difficult to make. You might only keep 3 TV shows to cycle through at a time, or maybe you go through your closet and get rid of some old clothes that you don't wear anymore. The last strategy is to systematize. So this would be using categories and what I call pattern planning to create repeatable systems. This can be really helpful if you struggle with boredom, which if you have ADHD, I'm sure you do. So by planning in patterns and categories, this allows you to have some flexibility and change things up while still making those decisions way in advance and not having to make the decision every single time. So first, what you want to do is identify an area of your life to systematize, then identify different categories or other ways to plan in patterns. List different variables in each category that you can cycle between, and then schedule out the categories. So if you're talking about meal planning, maybe you decide that Mondays you'll have Italian food and Tuesdays you'll have Asian food. If you're scheduling out exercise, maybe Mondays are for weightlifting and Tuesdays are for kickboxing class. Then you can add the categories to your calendar or put this sheet somewhere you'll see it and remember so that you already have those decisions laid out for you. Here's one example if you want to systematize your exercise. So you might assign different types of exercise to the different days of the week and then make your category list under it. So for Sunday, maybe you decide if the weather is good, you'll go on a hike. If the weather's not good, you're doing weightlifting. Then on Monday, you might do a YouTube tutorial for a workout at home. So if last Monday you did Zumba on YouTube, this Monday you'll be doing Pilates. So you'll cycle through that list so that you don't have to make the decision every week, but you can prevent boredom. Another example for work, you may decide to block out certain chunks of time for different types of activities or assignments. So you may schedule a chunk of time for paperwork on Mondays and a different chunk of time to schedule your meetings. This can also help you to stay in a state of flow rather than switching between a bunch of tasks. And last, you can make a plan. So identify the steps you need to reach your goal and make those changes. First, just write a broad plan of what changes you will make. So think through the strategies and the systematizing that I just discussed and decide what makes the most sense for you. For example, I will reduce decision fatigue by systemizing my meal planning, automating grocery runs, and deleting my need to meal plan on the weekends by eating leftovers or takeout. Then make a list of the steps you'll take to follow through with that plan. So, okay, I need to create a weekly schedule of my meal categories. I need to create a list of recipes to rotate through for each of those categories. And I need to set an alarm to remind myself of what my meals will be that week. And then last, schedule when you'll work on each step. So I might set a reminder for tomorrow to create that weekly schedule and another reminder for the day after to work on the list of recipes. And once you finish that plan and you schedule it out, you're all done. You can move forward with executing the plan and make adjustments as needed, but hopefully it will save you a lot of time and energy and you won't run into as much decision fatigue in the future. Thank you for listening, and I hope this was helpful.
All right. Welcome to the Q&A for how to prevent decision fatigue from the Monoceros Initiative. I'm Jaylyn, and I'm here with the presenter, Kacey Richards. Thank you for being
Hi.
here.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, if anyone has a question for Kacey, please put it into the Q&A section of our chat and we will try to get to them if there's time. But first question. So I know a lot of us with ADHD get a lot of dopamine and excitement from brainstorming and researching, but find that there is a point where all of that excitement from brainstorming and researching turns into fatigue and decision fatigue. What are some suggestions that you have for those of us who find ourselves in this brainstorming to decision fatigue trap?
Yeah, so this is very common for a lot of reasons. I think we do get stuck in the brainstorming phase because it's easy, it's passive rather than actively doing the thing we're brainstorming about. And it's also, you know, sometimes we use up all of the novelty effect during that brainstorming phase. And so by the time it comes time to do the thing, the novelty wears off and we're bored by it. So I think it's really important to set time limits on the brainstorming phase. So say you're like looking up recipes for, you want to make a soup. I would set a timer and say, okay, like I'm only going to spend 5 minutes actually looking for a recipe, and then it's time to start making my to-do list. It's annoying. I know a lot of us hate using timers, but it's kind of one of the only ways to really avoid the hyper focus that can often happen in the brainstorming phase. And I think it can help us realize too, like how much time is passing. So even if the timer goes off and you're like, oh shoot, I still haven't found the right recipe, at least you're now aware, like, okay, I'm spending more time than I would like to. I can maybe set another 2-minute timer, but now I'm more aware of the time that's passing and I'm gonna focus and really just pick a recipe. And a lot of us are perfectionists too. So we need to be careful. It doesn't have to be the perfect recipe. We can adapt it, right? So there are a lot of factors there. And then the other thing, I think a lot of times we lose the motivation, or we think like, oh, I need to wait until the motivation strikes to actually move into the action phase. And motivation actually comes after action. We think that we need motivation to start acting, but we have to start acting for the motivation to continue. So I think just remembering that can help a lot. Remembering that we have to just start somewhere. So if the first step is making the grocery list, okay, the grocery list only takes 5 minutes. I'm just going to do the grocery list right now, but I'm just going to focus on that. And then the motivation to actually go to the grocery store might follow. I'm just going to put my shoes on to head to the grocery store. And then once my shoes are on, maybe the motivation comes. But yeah, I would say the time boundaries, and find something small to start with so the motivation can follow. The last thing is that shifting from brainstorming to doing is a transition, and we struggle with transitions. Shifting is an executive functioning skill. So sometimes it can help to visualize what it will look like or feel like when you're actually doing the thing. And then it can be easier to actually do it when you picture what it's going to look like. Or you can try just the 5 minutes. Just tell yourself, I'm just going to do it for 5 minutes. And then usually the motivation is going to hit somewhere in those first 5 minutes of the task.
Yeah, it's funny. Sometimes I just do 10 seconds. Like I just have to start working on it for 10 seconds and I'm just like, oh, I want to roll. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So the next question is, any tips for someone who struggles with decision fatigue related specifically to how to prioritize your day, like deciding what to focus on each day as an entrepreneur?
Oh, that's a great one. It's very difficult as an entrepreneur, especially. I would say trying to do some sort of mind map and categorize. Really anything can be categorized. So once you sort things into categories, there's usually less priorities to prioritize. I don't know how to word that. less items to rank, I should say. So grouping things into like bigger projects or bigger types of tasks can help, and there's less decisions there to prioritize. In my example in the presentation, I think I talked about like breaking down specific chunks of the day to do a specific type of task. So that's one way to do it. And then, but if you can think in terms of categories, it's a little bit easier to, once you've figured out your priorities in your business, they're kind of set, and you don't have to think through that type of thing on a daily basis.
Okay. Just in case someone watching this has not heard the term mind map before, you want to briefly explain what that is?
Yeah, so it's kind of like making a spider web of different things and figuring out the bigger picture. So I have an ADHD coaching business. So the bigger picture items might be the one-on-one coaching, the group coaching, the financial aspects of the business, and the marketing aspects of the business. So those are my 4 big bubbles in the center. And then I can split that off into specific tasks that fall into those categories. So it's just one way to organize your thoughts. And you can, if you can't see the bigger picture, you can look at your to-do list and work backwards to then create the mind map.
And is this done like in our heads or like written down somewhere?
I would definitely visualize it. So put it on paper, or there are electronic tools that you can use. I'm drawing a blank on the one that I've used before, but you can search for a, like, it's not AI, but a planning website that will help you set up a mind mapping online.
So just like Google mind map and all the tools will come up. Okay, awesome. Okay, next question. Decision fatigue is something that can happen in some moments and not others. Do you have any tips on how we can identify when we're entering periods of decision fatigue before we reach that point?
Yeah, so definitely if you know a life transition is coming up, that's a big key that you will likely experience decision fatigue in that time. There are a lot of decisions associated with those life transitions anytime that we're out of our normal routine. But then aside from that, it's usually just the same signs and symptoms of decision fatigue. You might just notice them less frequently or less intensely leading up to the point of really reaching decision fatigue. So I notice for myself, a lot of times I'll start to get more irritable or more overwhelmed more easily. And then decision fatigue definitely hits harder toward like later in the night or in the evening time. We are able to usually reset after we get a night of sleep for the next day. So if you notice that by the end of the day, you're starting to feel more overwhelmed or irritable, that could be a sign that if you don't start implementing some strategies and reducing the amount of decisions you're making, that fatigue that you're feeling could creep in earlier into the day.
Okay. So it can build, but there can also be patterns that we notice of like decision fatigue regularly being part of our day.
Right.
Okay. So you talk about automating the process so that there are reminders and time set to do certain things. I know that a lot of us with ADHD also struggle with demand avoidance and not wanting to do the thing. I'll use an example. I get a reminder every day, like before 11 o'clock, that it's my time to go to bed, and instantly I don't want to go to bed at that time. So what do you suggest for those of us who find ourselves not wanting to do the things we've automated time for?
So with demand avoidance, it's this idea of, oh, I have to do this right now. But that's a lie. We don't have to do anything. We're free people. And so it's really a mindset shift. You have to recognize, yes, this timer is here to tell me I have to do it, but I always have a choice. So when you think of it as a choice and you view both of your options, it can be a little bit easier to sort through what's holding you back. So, like if you're making a grocery list or something and your timer goes off, so it's time to make your grocery list for the week, then you can think through, okay, I can I feel some resistance creeping up in my body, I can either do my grocery list now, feel prepared, go to the store. Yes, I might not totally enjoy the experience, but I get to make this soup that I really want to make tonight because I'm making the grocery list now and I get to go to the store today and all of this. Or I can put off making the grocery list. I can either wing it at the store and then probably have to go back again later because I forgot something. Or I'm going to not be able to make soup today, right? So you're following through that train of thought to see, okay, where will this decision lead me? A lot of times we just stop and shut down at the, I don't want to, I don't have the motivation, which again, motivation comes after action. So you have to follow through your train of thought and think about the consequences. And also think about why your instinct is to choose one decision over another. So maybe it's, well, this grocery list writing is really, really tedious. It's boring. Like, it's just not as fun as the thing that I'm doing right now. And once you realize why you're avoiding it, you can address those roadblocks. So, okay, I can make it more exciting by putting on music while I make my grocery list. You can address those different barriers once you follow through that thought process.
So you're saying that when I get that notification saying it's time to go to bed, it's not that I have to go to bed at that time. It's like, ooh, now I get to go to bed if I want to.
Yeah, so hopefully it takes practice to shift to that positive of a thought, which is why I'm like, start by just neutral thoughts, right? Okay. But eventually, yes, it can help if you shift to, I get to go to bed and let me think about all the positive things that will happen if I go to bed now. I'm going to feel so great tomorrow.
Yeah, and also sleeping is great.
Yeah, sleeping's great. But maybe you're held back by going to sleep because you're doing something really fun. And so you can remind yourself, I'm just going to pause this for now. I'll pick it up tomorrow, or something along those lines where you have to think through, why am I resistant to doing this and what can I do to make it easier for myself? But yes, it does take practice. So if it's really a struggle for anyone, I do recommend working with an ADHD coach. I also have on my website a free PDF guide that goes through how to prevent decision fatigue. And that PDF guide has a few more ideas and strategies for that kind of thing in it as well.
Okay, perfect. And Kacey's website is listed on our ADHDvCon page, so you can go ahead and get that resource there. That's all the time that we have for today for questions. Thank you so much, Kacey, for being here for a Q&A today and being part of ADHDvCon. I just want to remind everyone that if you found ADHDvCon to be helpful to you and you have the means and desire to do so, please leave us a tax-deductible donation to the Monoceros Initiative. The link is in the live stream description. And with that said, thanks, Kacey, and we will move on to the next presentation.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this mini workshop on organizing your home. I'd like to begin with a little bit about me. My name is Christina. I'm based in Metro Vancouver, Canada, and I discovered I had ADHD about a year ago, actually a little bit more than a year ago, when a friend suggested it to me. She had been diagnosed a few years herself earlier, and we have been friends for about several years, and she actually point blank just asked me, are you sure you don't have ADHD? And then slowly the pieces started falling into place. But then I got diagnosed earlier this year in April officially. So and at around the same time that I started to realize I had ADHD was the same time I got let go. And I just thought, you know what? I've been let go 3 times due to the pandemic. This isn't a stable form of income. You know what? Let's organize. Let's see if I can organize people's homes, because in my previous job, I had organized and decluttered a bunch of business spaces, and I've organized someone's home for fun, and I was just like, let's give it a go. And a year later, I'm being booked with clients and helping people with ADHD, and it's been such a ride and such joy. So if you want to learn from someone who has done the ropes, let's get into it. We're going to be going over some of the basic guidelines and steps of organizing your home when you have ADHD. So the first step, or the first guideline I should say, is decluttering. And it is a misnomer that organization starts with putting items away, putting items in shelves, putting items in bins. And it's more about it starts with decluttering, because you do not want to organize stuff that you do not need. I would argue, from my personal experience in doing home organization, it's about 50% of the job. And it can be really hard for some people to give up. As people with ADHD, it can be really, really hard to give up the stuff that we have the dopamine hit for, that we got, or continue to bring in that stuff that gives us a dopamine hit, but we know we aren't going to use. And it can be really hard for people with ADHD to manage that. And usually what I tell clients is like, you can get the dopamine hit if you have a plan for how you can get rid of it later that you know you will follow through. So like having a donation bin, or knowing that a friend will love this and get an extra dopamine hit by giving it to that friend. So decluttering is a super important part of home organization, even though it can be very hard with people with ADHD. The next part of home organization is learning to live with yourself. And I always say to my clients that aesthetics are very, very much a consideration of my process, but they are not the final word. Ultimately, you, the person who lives there, and the people who live there are the ones who are going to be living there. You can have guests who come over and look at your stuff, but they're not living there. And I also like to say, for people who are worried about what other people think when they come into their home, is it realistic that you are going to have people going into your closet and saying, oh, this is not in the right place. Oh, this salt is in the wrong place. It should be there. Or are people just going to be there to see you and have a good time? Probably the latter. So aesthetics, if the aesthetics help you maintain your space, great. That's awesome. If all the colors, and you're like, okay, red is paper, orange is glue, green is scissors. Awesome. If you remember that, great. But if you're just doing this because you saw it on Instagram or TikTok and you're like, oh, I have to do it that way, there's no rules here. It's what works best with you. And ultimately, our goals in organizing our function, and especially for people with ADHD, fun, because the more fun it is, the more likely we're going to do something. It's a great motivator in organizing our space. Another part of organizing, and it goes back to decluttering, is reducing, reusing, and recycling, the 3 R's. And so reducing is a bit like decluttering, reducing what we don't use, and donating gently used items to organizations like your local thrift shop, e-waste sites, local charities, buy nothing groups, depending on where you live, are a great source for getting rid of stuff. Reusing. I always tell clients, we always buy bins at the end, because if we're getting rid of a bunch of stuff, we are not going to put it all in there and then have to redo it. So, and you might end up finding bins or finding boxes that you want to use anyway. And so we can put that aside and then buy them then. And then recycling. So a fun fact that many people don't know, that the 3 R's are not just a mantra, they're a hierarchy. Reducing what you buy is best for your brain, because the less stuff you have and the less clutter you have, the easier it is to think for our ADHD brains. But it's also better for the environment. But these are reduce, reuse, recycle. They're all great ways to help start the home organization process. Let's play a game, or rather, let's gamify your home. So here I've compiled a list of resources that you can use to gamify your home and to make it easier to organize your home and live with ADHD. So timers really helpful. You can also do reverse timers, like counting up. Okay, I've spent X amount of minutes doing this because the timer says this. I've heard of that method as well. A chore chart. Oh, I get a little sticker every time I put away 5 items, for example, and when I get home from work. The ADHD planner. Oh, sorry. By Danny Donovan. I do apologize for the box. There we go. But the ADHD planner by Danny Donovan, I have the PDF version, but you can get the physical version. Has great methods for creating games to put away your stuff, to get chores done, all that sorts of stuff, and having multiples of the same item. Ultimately, even though you're paying a bit of ADHD tax up front, that's what you're doing. If you're going to have to replace that thing multiple times, why not have it stationed multiple places around your house? I have like 6 water bottles in every part of my room, 2 in my living room, 1 for exercise and 1 am I sitting down on the couch, because if I have the water bottle next to me, I will drink out of it. If it's somewhere else that I can't reach, I'm not going to drink out of it. These are several apps that you can use: Habitica, Streaks, Trello. Habitica and Streaks are more about gamifying and trying to get as much habits. Trello is just a project management tool where you have multiple lists, and you have multiple lists, and you can move items to do, to doing, to done, or any method you'd like. And Do is sadly an iOS app, but what I like about it is that constantly reminds you you can snooze it, but it'll keep reminding you every 5 to 10 minutes every time you set it. And finally, if you want to use humans to help you, you can do body doubling services. You can use body doubling services. I use Flow, but there's FocusMate, which provides free 3 sessions per week that you can use their services. Or there's lots out there. If you just Google body doubling services, you can find lots. You can ask around ADHDvCon, hey, does anyone want to be my accountability buddy? You can search ADHD coaching. I use Vancouver ADHD coaching, but she is global. Her name's Dusty. She's amazing. Can't recommend her enough. Or you can do a chore runs with friends. Like, hey, I need to get some organizing tools, or I need to do some groceries. Do you want to come with? And it's a great way to catch up with friends, but also get your chores done, because it's really annoying and boring sometimes. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed my mini workshop on home organizing. If you want home organization and live in the Metro Vancouver area, you can click on my website. It takes you through the process and gives you an idea of what my services are being offered right now, or you can check out the QR code at the bus stop here. If you don't live in Metro Vancouver and are especially interested in my services after seeing this workshop and or my website, please email me at fruitfulspaces@gmail.com, which is also listed in the website here. I'd be open to virtual home organization for people with ADHD if you're willing to try it. I'd love to get to know you and to hear more about what your problems are in your home and in your space. Thanks for watching.
Hey y'all, thanks for joining me today. I'm Suzanne, a certified peer support specialist in the areas of ADHD, autism, addiction, and special needs parenting. I want to get real with you for a minute. If you've got ADHD like I do, then you probably know our brains are always on the hunt for the next big thing, right? So whether it's a new hobby, our latest business idea, the next level of a game, or just something that feels exciting, our brains crave next level stimulation. But sometimes that hunt for something to help us self-regulate and find stimulation or relaxation can lead us to addiction before we even know what hit us. And so that's what we're diving into today, is ADHD and addiction. We're going to explore why people with ADHD might be more at risk, and more importantly, how we can break free from the cycle. So let's get into it. So here's the deal. ADHD makes it challenging to regulate attention and impulses. And that also means self-regulation. It's like having a brain that is always looking for the next source of stimulation, making it difficult to stick with one thing for too long, constantly juggling thoughts and distractions. Sometimes it feels almost impossible to quiet the noise. So when something, whether it's a video game, social media, or a substance, can provide us with that sense of focus and relief that we're looking for, it can quickly become something that we rely on. So I don't know, have you ever found yourself scrolling endlessly through TikTok or playing just one more level of a game when you know you should stop? Of course you have, me too, because that is the ADHD brain in action. It's always looking for the next hit of dopamine. And so when it comes to substances, it is a real slippery slope from this helps me feel better to I need this to get through the day. It really isn't a small issue either, because research shows that people with ADHD are more than twice as likely to develop an addiction compared to those without ADHD. In fact, studies estimate that 25% approximately of adults with substance use disorders also have ADHD. Let's talk about self-medication. A lot of people with ADHD turn to substances or certain behaviors because honestly, it feels like it helps. So maybe it calms your anxiety, or it helps you focus, or it just quiets the constant chatter that's in your head. And in the moment, you feel like you might have found the answer. But here's the thing. It's not a solution. So it's more like a Band-Aid. And over time, that Band-Aid can turn into a whole other set of problems and make coping with your ADHD challenges even more difficult. Basically, addiction robs us from living our best life. I've heard so many stories from people in our community, and they all have that common thread. I know that was my experience as well. For example, I have a client who started drinking alcohol socially just to manage their anxiety. At first, it seemed like it was helping. She felt calmer, more in control, more fun at happy hour. But then COVID hit and she started drinking at home in order to help her get through Zoom meetings and get through the day. And before long, she couldn't get through the day without drinking. And so what started as a way to cope became a dependency that took over her life. But addiction isn't always alcohol or drugs. I had another client who turned to disordered eating and caloric restriction as a way to gain a sense of control over his life. And that started out as a way for him to manage stress. But eventually it began to affect everything: his physical health, his mental well-being, and also his relationships. And these are stories that I hear all too often. But you know, those stories and mine are actually stories of resilience, because every one of those people is working to reclaim their life. And if they can do it with their ADHD and addiction challenges, and I can do it, then I know you can do it too. Before we talk about breaking free, it's important to know how to recognize if you might have a problem in the first place. Sometimes it's not always clear when a coping mechanism has crossed that line into something that's more harmful. And sometimes, because with ADHD, we lack a sense of self-awareness, it can be really challenging for us to figure out when we have a problem. So here are some signs to look out for. First, it's hard to stop. So you might find that even though you want to stop using a substance or engaging in a behavior, you can't. You've tried to cut back, but it just doesn't stick. Definite red flag. If it's affecting your life, so is it starting to mess with your schoolwork? Are your grades slipping? Is work more challenging? Are your relationships strained? Are you losing interest in things you used to love? Those are all red flags as well. Third, and this was a big one for me, was you're hiding it. So think about whether or not you're keeping it a secret from the people around you. Do you feel like you have to hide how much you're drinking, how much you're working, how much you're restricting your calories, or any other habit? Also a big red flag. Fourth, it's becoming your go-to. So whenever you're stressed, anxious, bored, looking to self-regulate, you immediately reach for that drink or that unhealthy habit or escape. If it's your go-to for handling your emotions, it might be time to take a closer look at what's going on. And lastly, and this one's kind of obvious, but those of us with ADHD are often behind on our doctor's appointments and taking care of ourselves. And so if it's impacting your health physically or mentally, if you're noticing changes in your health, whether it's weight loss, increased anxiety, or just feeling out of control, it's worth paying attention to. So how do we break free? First off, it's about recognizing that if any of these signs resonate with you, it's okay. Recognizing that there might be a problem is really the first step toward taking back control. But recognizing it is really also just the beginning. So the first thing is that admitting that you have a problem, and that's huge. Acknowledging that something isn't quite right can be tough, especially when we're not sure what to do about it, but it is crucial. It's a crucial first step. And you're not alone in this. It's okay to reach out for help. Second is to create an action plan. So once you've admitted that there's a problem, it's time to make a plan. And this can include setting clear goals, like reducing or quitting the behavior, identifying your triggers, and figuring out what steps you can take each and every day to move closer to your goal. Third, seek accountability. It is key. Talk to someone you trust. It could be a friend, a family member, or even a professional. They can help keep you on track and offer support when things get tough and remind you why you are trying to cut back or alleviate the thing in the first place. Fourth, engage in peer support. Oh my gosh, I cannot overstate this. Don't underestimate the power of peer support for accountability. Having someone who can be a sounding board can make all the difference. You don't have to do this alone. Trust me, asking for help, again, is a strength and it's not a weakness. Connecting with others who inherently understand your struggles can be so empowering. And there are many, many groups out there. In Los Angeles, our CHAD chapter runs a group specifically for ADHD and addiction, or you can explore other support groups like Alcoholics Anonymous, Smart Recovery, Recovery Dharma, or even inpatient support if you feel like you need more intensive support. Lastly, explore professional support. Sometimes it's necessary. Therapy, counseling, peer support by a peer specialist can also be super, super helpful. Even if you're in AA, taking a sponsor can be really helpful. On the path to recovery, you definitely don't need to walk it alone. Managing both our ADHD and our addiction are easier if we don't try to do it alone. So here's the bottom line. ADHD may make us more vulnerable to addiction, but it doesn't define us. Just like having ADHD itself doesn't define us. Falling into a pattern of addiction when you have ADHD is generally a way of coping with life, doing the best you can with the energy and the resources that you have in that moment. And when you know better, you can do better. So if you feel like you might be struggling with addiction, start by admitting it and reach out a hand for support. There's so many options out there, and it does and will get better.
Hello, everyone. My name is Farah Jamil, and I'm the founder of Muslim ADHDers, Interfaith ADHDers, and Executive ADHDers. I have about 20 years of experience as a health executive. I'm a trained executive coach and ADHD coach, and I'm a consultant and a global speaker. Today, I want to talk about what it's like to be a Muslim with ADHD. Now, here's a quick disclaimer. Please know that I don't represent all 2 billion Muslims in the world, just as any person with ADHD does not represent all ADHDers in the world. I can only speak about my own lived experiences, so that's what I'll be sharing here. End of disclaimer. When I was diagnosed, it finally explained some of my challenges, including time blindness, procrastination, difficulty transitioning from one task to another, why my brain always felt like it was constantly on, etc. Luckily, there are ADHDers out there who provide some great content about these very topics related to ADHD. But I didn't see anyone who looked like me talking about the intersectionality between ADHD and faith. What do I mean by that? Well, it's amazing how elements of time blindness, procrastination, a buzzing brain, etc., can impact someone who's trying to practice their faith and spirituality. For me, as a Sunni Muslim, one of the cornerstones of my faith is to do the 5 daily prayers. At first, that may sound like a lot, but it really isn't. Each prayer can take as little as 5 to 10 minutes each. So, 5 prayers at about 10 minutes each equals to less than 1 hour of total prayer time per day, and it's broken up into 5 times. These prayers are not meant to be difficult or a burden. In fact, it's the opposite. It's meant to support and nourish us. It's a way to develop a direct one-on-one connection with God. It reminds us to take a break a few times a day from life's craziness and to spend quality time in peace and reflection. Many faith traditions talk about how food is fuel for our bodies and prayer is fuel for our souls. And there's growing and ongoing research that shows how prayer and meditation can play a very important role in self-care and better managing some ADHD symptoms. And frankly, if I can spend hours and hours watching TV or working or hanging out with my family and friends, then spending less than 1 hour per day in prayer or meditation sounds very reasonable, right? Yet, for a Muslim ADHDer, this beautiful expression of faith and self-care can cause so much overwhelm and anxiety. First, we have to make sure we've done the ablutions before the prayer. Then we have to get to the prayer mat. And then we have to quiet our buzzing brains down and focus on the prayer. For a neurotypical, this can seem pretty simple. Need to pray? Go get ready for prayer and get to the prayer mat. Just do it. Need to get in better shape? Go to the gym or move around more. Just do it. Need to run some errands? Make a list, go to the store or order online. Just do it. For a neurodivergent, this is not so simple. We want to pray. We really, really do. We know that it's good for us physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. But for some of us, all those steps, as small as they may sound, can be overwhelming. Here are some examples of how ADHD can make prayer feel so overwhelming. Let's start with time blindness. Remembering to do our prayers on time, that can be a big one. Procrastination. We have several hours between each prayer time to complete that 5 to 10 minute prayer. Yet with the time blindness and the procrastination, we can suddenly find ourselves missing that time window. That can possibly be attributed to task transition. Transitioning from whatever task we're already doing to the new task of getting ready for prayer can be very challenging. For some of us, it was so difficult getting into focus mode for that first task that it's really difficult to shift to being physically and mentally ready for the new task of prayer. And then being able to go back and transition back to refocus on the first task after the prayer is complete, that's another challenge in and of itself. When we finally do get to the prayer mat, there's now the issue of calming our brains down enough to concentrate on the prayer, being able to focus on the prayer instead of thinking of other things like what we need to get on our next grocery run, or remembering to email or text someone back, and so on. These are just some examples of how ADHD can make prayer feel overwhelming and challenging every single day. These same concepts apply for ADHDers who are trying to do anything consistently, whether it's trying to go to the gym several times a week consistently, or getting to places on time consistently. We want to do all these things and more. We know the benefits of doing all the things consistently. Yet, it feels like our ADHD is constantly getting in the way of our success in life and for the hereafter. That's when what I call the guilt, blame, shame cycle kicks in. We feel so much guilt for missing a prayer that we may end up not doing the rest of our prayers that day. That's part of the all or nothing mentality that some ADHDers may have. So We blame and shame ourselves for being so ADHD, even though research has shown that we were born with not having as much of two neurotransmitters that are needed for focus and attention, dopamine and norepinephrine. That would be like blaming a type 1 diabetic whose pancreas doesn't produce enough insulin. Did they choose to have a pancreas that doesn't produce enough insulin and then being a type 1 diabetic? Something over which they had no control? No, of course not. Then why do we blame ourselves for having ADHD and having these challenges? Now, let me be clear. ADHD is not an excuse, it's an explanation. We're not trying to excuse these challenges. We're explaining how these challenges profoundly impact us every single day. Telling us to just do it won't help. So, what can possibly help? I created a formula for ADHD success. It can apply to prayer, anything else in life. First, make the sincere intention with a clear goal. Plus, find the right structure and support for your brain so that we can do it. Let's try this out with prayer. Suppose we want to do the mid-afternoon prayer called Asr. This one can be easy to miss because we're likely in the middle of doing something else like work or errands around that time of day, etc. First, let's start with our goal, to pray Asr. Then we find the right structure and support for this. And for each of us, this structure and support may look different. Because remember, when you've met one person with ADHD, you've met one person with ADHD, and we all present differently. For some, it could be enough to proactively put it in our calendar that this is the Asr time and attach an alarm to it. Maybe that's enough to remind us to do that prayer. For others, it could be having a prayer buddy, kind of like a study buddy, to remind us to pray together. Or it could be connecting it with something to help motivate us to get to the prayer mat, such as drinking our favorite cup of coffee or tea before or after the prayer. Oh, and if you're sensitive to caffeine in the afternoon, try decaf. By making that clear goal and finding the right structure and support for our ADHD, this helps our brains and bodies to be able to do all the things, including prayer. Just like daily insulin shots help type 1 diabetics manage their diabetes, finding the right structures and supports can help us as ADHDers navigate our unique challenges and better manage our ADHD. Remember, as ADHDers, our symptoms all present differently. So what works for one ADHDer may not work for another, and that's okay. What's important is that we experiment to see what works for us, and just as importantly, what doesn't work for us. It's also important for there to be compassion and self-compassion. If we again take prayer as an example, having compassion from others can be part of that structure and support. For example, helping people like spiritual leaders, parents, teachers, etc., understand the challenges of ADHD could go a long way to helping cultivate a love for prayer, instead of being guilted, blamed, or shamed when we don't find it as easy to do this as others. Some people can just stop, drop, and pray, but not all of us. It's just as important to have self-compassion. ADHDers are notorious for being really, really hard on ourselves. That inner critic that loves to tell us we're not good enough. Instead, we need to remind ourselves that no human being is perfect. We are making the effort. That's why having a clear goal and intention is a key part of the formula for ADHD success. We need to help our brains navigate the challenges so that we can be our best selves in anything we want to accomplish in this life and the hereafter. I hope this was helpful in providing some insights on the intersectionality between ADHD and faith. Feel free to connect with me on Instagram under my handles Muslim ADHDers or Interfaith ADHDers or Executive ADHDers. Thank you and take care.
All right, welcome everyone to the Q&A for shorts number 3 from the Monoceros Initiative. I'm Jaylin and I'm here with all of our presenters. For Organizing Your Home ADHD Style, we have Christina K. For ADHD and Addiction, we have Suzanne Sophos. And for ADHD and Prayer, we have Farah Jamil. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. So the names and presenters of these shorts are all listed in the live stream description as well. If you have a question for any of these presenters, please put it in the Q&A section of the live stream chat and we will try to get to them if there is time, but we're just going to go right into it. Okay, first question is for Christina, because yours was first. What do you suggest for those of us who are completely unsure of whether these standards we have for organization or tidying are because we want to or because of external pressures?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I like to think of like the people who are affected by the organization and think of them in priorities of concentric circles. So we start with you because you live in your home and you arguably spend the most time in it. Then there's a second circle, which is like roommates or family or people who live with you. And then you have guests, people who come in, maybe vendors or people who are working on your home, whatever it be, landlords. So we want to start with you and we want to make you the center of your living space because ultimately you are the most affected by your living space. So I like a long debate in, I suppose, North America is whether you put your medicine in your kitchen cabinet or your pantry. My answer, you can put it in your TV cabinet for all I care. Where are you going to remember it and where are you going to be like, oh, I'm feeling really ill, I need to go get my medication? Your vendor, your landlords, your family are likely not going to really care where your medicine is. And this is likely for a lot of things. Now, if you're working, like, again, we have the center of you, but if you are living with people, then it's like about having conversations of, okay, where do we keep the cutlery? Where do we keep, do we have a separate fridge for certain foods because you are allergic to things? Like considering people outside of the concentric zone is important. But if we're talking about small things like where to keep stuff that only affects you, think about who is it affecting the most and then make your decision from there.
Awesome. Yeah. So for me, I don't have guests or people that I live with, so my medication just sits on the counter.
Perfect. That
That's
works.
the perfect place for it. Okay, thanks, Christina. My next question is for Suzanne. So I know that with ADHD, a lot of us can feel avoidance about doing the reflection needed to identify whether our coping methods are healthy or unhealthy. What do you suggest if anyone finds themselves unable to do that deep reflection?
That's a good question. And it's actually really common because when you're going through the worst part of addiction, you're using the substance or the work or whatever it is that you're overindulging on to kind of dampen your emotions or regulate your emotions. And so it stands to reason that for a lot of people, that's what they're trying to avoid, right? Like that's the one thing they don't want to do. So I always suggest starting small and really looking at those foundational things like, are you getting enough sleep? Are you getting enough protein like we heard about earlier? Are you like getting enough time outdoors? And the other things that you need to do to nourish yourself from like a physical point of view and a spiritual point of view, just starting with those small things can like help people open up to being more ready to do reflection. And another thing, and I have to use it all the time, is those of us with ADHD, if things are not externalized, it becomes really hard for us to make sense of them. And so externalizing by writing a journal is a really great way to reflect without even really knowing that that's what you're doing. So that's definitely something that I recommend. And then I think you kind of ease into it, right? Like once you break that down, it does get easier. And if it doesn't, there are things like somatic therapy and EMDR that can help release some of that trauma that is like keeping you from wanting to do really deep reflection.
Amazing. Yeah, it's so hard. And I love that you are saying, like, start with something that feeds your soul.
Yeah.
So,
And
love
it
it.
will fuel you when you make a small step and you see some success or some like release of your burden. I think it becomes much easier to kind of keep going and doing that work. That's why like when people take the AA route, there's 12 steps because you can't do them all at once and just go, okay, it's magic. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, yeah. Takes a full scope, right?
Yep. Yep.
All right, thanks, Suzanne. Okay, next question is for Farah. What suggestions do you have for finding prayer buddies that you suggested, especially for those of us who are, or especially those who are understanding and empathetic of our ADHD struggles? How do we find them?
Great question. So I would say it's in the same way that you would find any kind of accountability buddy. So for some people, it could be, in this case, if you're looking to have a steady practice for meditation or prayer or anything, just to have that time for yourself, that focus time. It could be something like doing a body doubling session, right? So there are a lot of body doubling things out there now where you could do a body doubling session either with a stranger or with someone that you know. So setting that up could be one way to do that. Another way to find a prayer buddy, I would say, is I always say go from the inside out. So check with things that you already have. Maybe that's like another family member. Maybe it's a friend where you have that same goal. So always start from the inside out. Start within your own home. Is there anyone within your own home that is also looking to establish this kind of spiritual practice? That's great. And then work your way out from there. We want to make it as easy for our brains as possible because we know how when we get overwhelmed, then we just get stuck and nothing happens, right? And then in terms of finding like those understanding and empathetic, hopefully with loved ones, that's one way to start. If you're still having a hard time doing that, I would say check in with your congregation. So, check in with your community. Doesn't matter what denomination you are, what spiritual practice you have, whatever that looks like for each of us. If you can't find it within your home space or with your friends or neighbors, or if you're shy to do it online through like a body doubling with a stranger, then check in with whatever place that is for you where you have that spiritual group and see if there may be some others who are just like you looking for that prayer buddy.
And I was thinking there might be specific groups like your group, Interfaith ADHDers, who have ADHD and potentially have the same faith, right? Like there's so many places we can look that it doesn't have to, it's often intimidating and it doesn't always have to be. The community is there.
The community is there.
Awesome. Thank you, Farah. Okay, back to Christina. This is probably a personal question, but you mentioned buy nothing groups as a way to gently give away what you don't need. So you and I have talked about buy nothing groups and the upsides and downsides to it. Can you share those with our viewers?
Absolutely. And also, I just wanted to say I had never heard of Interfaith ADHD. I'm 100% checking that out. So thank you for sharing that. I found Buy Nothing, I think, through a friend. And the downsides are, well, mostly it's on Facebook. They do have an app, but the app isn't necessarily user-friendly or ADHD-friendly. So if you're not on Facebook, that can be difficult. You could go through a friend and ask them to post on your behalf. That's possible. An upside is that a question I often ask my clients is, would you feel better giving something away, giving the item that they're struggling to declutter? Would you feel better if someone else had it and they liked it? And often that's a really great motivator for people with ADHD. It's like, oh, someone else gets to use it. I get a dopamine hit for giving a present. So that's a really great upside. And like my Buy Nothing group is really small. So like literally I never drive more than 5 minutes to drop off something. And I often, like when I was unemployed, I would make a walk out of it. Oh, I can walk 30 minutes in the sun and I get all this dopamine hit from delivering what I like my brain would associate it with a present. So I really like that. A downside of the group is that they do have sometimes very stringent rules. Mine doesn't allow links, period. Even if I'm looking for something, I have to just like screenshot the item and things like that. So like forgetting where the link, the rules of a group can be difficult, but there you can explain to them, oh, I need to do this, things like that. An upside to Buy Nothing is that you also get free stuff, and sometimes you just want a little thing, like you don't want a huge roll of Velcro, but you get another one. And last downside is that, sorry, ADHD and brain forgot. Downside is that you do have to post where your house is or like a cross street. So you might, if you're privacy focused, that might not be an option for you. But there are lots of ways to get rid of stuff like posting on Craigslist, posting on Facebook Marketplace, and then saying it's free and then meeting up at a public place. There's lots of ways to do that. Thank you for the question, Jay.
Well, you also said that before when we were talking about it. You said that being part of the Buy Nothing group sometimes means that you're getting a bunch of free stuff. And like when someone posts, it's like, ooh, I want that. And the impulsivity can have us accumulate more stuff. And I think I remember saying to you that like usually that happens, but then I'll see the other comments of the people who want it, and I'm just like, I don't want it more than they do. Like it seems like they really need it. I'm gonna let them have it. And like, whew, that freedom of being able to say that. Wow, it's amazing.
It's great. And if you're having trouble trying to declutter your stuff, you can always reach out for a free 30-minute call. I'll put the link in the chat. And if you have questions unanswered, feel free to reach out and we can talk.
Okay. So I am going to do the next one. I'm going to skip over to Farah again. You spoke about having our spiritual leaders, parents, and teachers have compassion about our struggles with ADHD. Do you have any tips on how to communicate this to them?
So I would say use language or examples that resonate with them. So for example, if we're talking about a spiritual leader, you know, whether it's an imam of a masjid or, you know, a priest in a church, whatever the case may be, look at scripture. Because I know that when I've spoken to others through my interfaith ADHDers group on Instagram, they've talked about, wow, like they can really resonate with a lot of things that I say, even though we're from different faiths. And a lot of it has to do with, well, how do I help others in my congregation understand? So I asked them, what does it say in your scripture about compassion? What does it say in your scripture about the importance of community, helping your neighbors, helping your family members? Because I think almost every scripture that I've seen or heard of, they've got those common values. And sometimes we need that reminder, you know, just because we're a little different doesn't mean we don't have just as much of a place in the community, whether it's the ADHD community, the faith community, the human community, we all have a place. So try to find those things that resonate. When we're talking about teachers, same thing. Look at school policies. What are the things that support that? What does it say as being part of a teacher? What is their role as a teacher? It's to support their students, to meet them where they're at. So include the kind of language that you know will help them to understand based on things that they identify with. I think that would probably be my advice when it comes to helping others understand.
Amazing. Okay, well, that's all the time we have for questions today. If you have questions you'd like answered by our presenters that we didn't get to, shoot us an email at monocerosinitiative@gmail.com and we will get it to the presenters. Thank you to all the shorts presenters for being part of ADHDvCon and for joining us for this Q&A. Just another reminder that if you find ADHDvCon to be helpful and have the means to do so, please make a tax-deductible donation to the Monoceros Initiative. The link to donate is in the live stream description. And now on to our next presentation.
Hey everyone, my name is Chipura. I'm a Master Certified ADHD Coach and Registered Doula, and I'm going to be talking to you today about how to advocate for yourself as a pregnant person with ADHD during labor. It can be really pretty intense to go through labor. It's something that many of us do only once or twice in our life. And when you've never done it before, you really don't know what to expect. If you toss in the mix having ADHD, anxiety, being autistic, it can make these really challenging things that you have to go through when you're in labor a little bit more stressful, or a lot more stressful. But labor doesn't have to be this like horrible, awful, scary thing that you hope to forget. Labor can be beautiful. Labor can be empowering. And if that's a new concept to you, that's a lot of what we talk about when we talk about midwifery and doula care. We're looking at how we can make your birth experience something that is beautiful and memorable. So when you have ADHD, there's a lot of things I think that can add to the stress of labor. Sometimes because of the urgency, we find that our minds come into focus, but there's also a lot of overwhelming things and overstimulating things about being in labor. So I wanted to tell you about an acronym that you can use to be an empowered birther if you are giving birth in a hospital setting. So what I want to teach you is the acronym BRAIN. The acronym BRAIN stands for benefits, risks, alternatives, interval of time, and no. So I'm going to explain each of those. You would use this acronym when in the hospital during labor, but you can also use it in the weeks leading up to labor if your care provider is wanting to, say, augment your labor, do a membrane sweep. If there's any kind of medical intervention that's introduced to you and you're just really not sure if that's what you should do or not, you can use the BRAIN acronym to be empowered and to make decisions. This can also really help in the moment if there's an emergency situation and people are like, hey, we got to do this, that, and the other. It's very rare that there's an emergent situation that is so like life or death that the doctor doesn't have a moment to slow down and just quickly explain to you what they're going to do and why. You may not have all the time in the world, but you usually have, a minute or two. So if you feel like in the hospital, medical interventions are being introduced to you, like, hey, we got to do a C-section. Hey, we're going to do this thing. Hey, we need to take you and do this thing right now. You can go, whoa, 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 whoa. And you can say, okay, what are the benefits of this procedure? Can you please explain to me why you want to do this? That's B. R is for risks. What are the risks of this procedure? Okay. A stands for alternatives. Are there alternatives to the procedure that you're suggesting or telling me that I need? I stands for interval of time. And that just means how long do I have to make this decision? Again, if this is an emergent situation, you may need to decide within the next, couple of minutes. But often the things that will be suggested to you are things that you can, at least take a little bit of time to think about, maybe sometimes days, right? So that would be especially for things like, hey, we want to do a membrane sweep. Hey, we want to induce labor, right? You usually have a bit of time to think about these things. In the case of an emergency C-section, again, you're still gonna, you could have anywhere from, 5 minutes to a couple of hours to decide, depending on the situation, right? So you really need to know that interval of time. Do I need to decide this now, or can I think about it a bit? And the last one, N, stands for no. And that just means, what if I say no? This is like kind of a radical concept for some people, but you always have full control and autonomy over your body in the hospital. And, it might seem like a no-brainer that like, oh, we should just do whatever we can to get the baby out as quick and as safely as possible. But it's not always that clear cut. We know that certain, hospitals have like higher rates of C-section than normal. Different doctors have different philosophies of care. So it's not always the case that like whatever your doctor is saying is like the absolute most, like the only path forward, the only thing that has to happen. And two different doctors might, even if they have similar training, might disagree on things, right? So that's why like you do always retain the full autonomy over your body. And we all want to make, the best, safest, and healthiest decisions for our babies. But we also have to consider that how we bring those babies into the world also has an impact on us, and that can affect things like bonding, right? Unfortunately, it is the case that sometimes when people give birth, it can be really, really traumatic. There can be, really terrible memories. And these kinds of things can put us at risk for increased like postpartum depression. They can impact bonding. And sometimes, right, sometimes these things that are being suggested to us are not actually medically necessary. They may be for the hospital's convenience because they want you in and out, they want to clear a bed, right? So just really kind of understanding the difference and understanding why someone is suggesting something is important. But when we have ADHD, we might really struggle with overwhelm, and we might really struggle with decision paralysis, right? We have that very binary perfectionistic brain. We want to do everything exactly right. And in a situation like labor, sometimes there is no exactly right choice, and that's really hard. So remembering that you have autonomy and that you can use this acronym BRAIN, benefits, risks, alternatives, interval of time, and what happens if I say no, will help you to be able to kind of like slow all of that down, get out of overwhelm, get all the data of you that you need, and be able to make an informed decision. Just a few more things I wanted to suggest going into the hospital. Overstimulation is a real thing. Often hospitals can be places with a lot of bright lights, strangers coming in and out of the room, unfamiliar setting, scratchy blankets, right? So we all know that we should pack a birth bag. Easier said than done sometimes. If you're struggling with it, please get body doubling to get it done. So really bringing a lot of sensory good things can be really helpful for your birth experience. Blankets with nice textures that you really, really like. Music, obviously, right? We all think like, oh, how about having a playlist that we really enjoy? But there can be other things as well, right? So are there, particular fuzzy socks that give you a really good vibe? Is there like a pillow or a pillowcase from home that you really enjoy? Do you really like squishmallows? Can you bring some of your favorite like stuffed animals from home? Do you have a favorite drink, a favorite mug maybe, right? So thinking about as many sensory good things as you can incorporate. I will say if it's like aromatherapy or smells based, just check with your care providers in your hospital if you're allowed to have scent based things before you bring them in. And then also knowing what you can ask for and advocate for. So as a doula, my job is always to advocate for my clients in the hospital. So having the lights low, having as few interruptions as possible, having as few internal or vaginal exams as possible, being able to eat and drink freely, being able to wear your own clothes. These are all things that are on the table, even though they may not tell you. You can ask for and insist that you be allowed to have these things. And they can go a long way to changing the vibe of what it feels like to give labor, right? To be in labor, because giving birth and being in labor is going to be painful, but it doesn't have to be scary and overwhelming. As a neurodivergent person, we may need to advocate for ourselves more. We may need to think more about what our needs are. So sitting down and sort of writing out a list of things that might help you feel better when you're in pain or uncomfortable could really make the difference between a scary birth experience and a really empowering birth experience. And that's what I want for you. So I hope the BRAIN acronym is helpful to you. If you're giving birth soon, I wish you a beautiful and memorable and minimally painful labor, but I know you're gonna do great. And if you need any more support during your pregnancy journey, please look me up on social media. My handles are probably somewhere associated with this talk, but my name is Dusty Chipura, and you can just Google me. Good luck.
So welcome everybody. My name's Diane McLean. I'm here with Elyse O'Connell, and we're here to share 5 things that uniquely wired kids wished you knew. For a lot of parents, I think it's really important, and for teachers. But before we dive in, I just wanted to share, like I said, my name is Diane McLean. I'm an ADHD coach. I'm also a person with ADHD. I come from the background of education. So before I was a coach, I was a school counselor and an educator. And now I'm a coach. I work with a lot of families and children who have ADHD. And Elyse, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Elyse O'Connell, and I am also a coach and a speaker. Like Diane said, I did do a lot of reflection on my childhood after I was diagnosed with ADHD and autism later in life. And I realized because I was undiagnosed and unable to ask for help, it caused me to build up a lot of negative self-beliefs. And because of that, I really want to work with children to help them not develop those same self-beliefs. So that's, one of the importances of sharing this information with everyone.
Yeah. Oh, great. And I think before we dive in, I know there were some important things that when I share them with families and parents and teachers, they make a really big difference. One of them is this concept of an executive function delay, a developmental delay for kids with ADHD. So I know for myself, it was really helpful when I was trying to work with children, knowing that, an 18-year-old may be chronologically 18, but their executive function age and is more around a 12-year-old. So it can be up to a 30% delay. And so I think while we don't want to lower standards for our kids, I think it helps us, knowing this delay, to have some realistic expectations. And it's not like they're broken. It's just they have a delay and they can't always do what other kids their age can do yet. And I think yet is kind of that key word. I think another thing that's really important is a lot of stats really show that people with ADHD, children with ADHD, are much more likely to experience bullying their peers. They can, by some reports, receive 20,000 more negative messages by the age of 10. That number's a little, they're all over the place, but in any case, it's a lot of negative messages coming to kids before they're 10 years old. And they have 2 to 3 times higher rates of abuse and neglect. So what we're talking about here is really to help prevent all of this and help kids with ADHD have happy childhoods and grow up to be happy adults. But I know, Elyse, one of the things people would ask you is, why don't you ask for help? And when you were little, you were like, I'm afraid, I'm too far behind. I don't know. I don't want you to be mad. I'm just going to give up. I'm really too afraid to ask for help. What is it that you really wish people knew?
I wish people knew back then that I really need to feel like I'm in a safe place to ask for help. I also, don't want to be called out in front of the class. It was really embarrassing. So to give it to me in private.
That sensitivity is real.
Intense sensitivity. And like you said, 10,000 up to 20,000, even more negative messages. So I have that trauma already. And let me know I'm not in trouble because it's going to cause me to shut down, and remind me of my strengths. So I feel like, I have an ally in you and you believe in me when you're like, hey, you can do this. That makes a big difference.
Well, and I think these things could help you feel safe asking for help. If you had known these. I know another thing you told me before is people would ask, why are you so good at some things and terrible at others? And as a kid, you were like, I don't know. If I'm interested, it's easy, but if I'm not, it seems impossible. What do you wish people knew?
I wish people knew that fundamentally the ADHD brain is different. And if I'm not interested in something, it could be even painful for me to try and do it, no matter how much I want to. So to kind of integrate my interests into the task to make it more engaging for me. Also, my brain, when the stakes are high, my brain freezes. So creating, homework assignments that aren't just, 100 per, negative, think of positive incentives to, help me learn, because my brain does shut down if I feel like I'm got too much pressure.
And I bet on tests too, same kind of thing. It's hard to show what you know when your brain is all locked up like that, right? Well, I know also people would always ask you, maybe teachers, you need to raise your hand. You need to participate more. And I know what you shared with me was, I'd rather say nothing than get in trouble or say the wrong thing. What would you want people to know?
I get very anxious when I'm put on the spot, and when the teacher I remember, even worrying about being called on more than the information, so that when they did call on me, my brain was just blank with panic and I hadn't paid attention even.
Right.
And also allowing small ways to participate. For me, I love doing the creative in-class projects and not always kind of doing the same thing of the teacher picking on you and recall. So coming up with some creative ways for, people to participate than just that, I think is key.
Right. Well, and I think it really is about that comfort again, helping you take it little by little so that you can get some confidence to
build up to doing that.
Yeah. Well, and I know another thing, and I heard this a lot when I was in schools as well, is why don't you turn in your homework? And I know what you told me is you always felt behind and overwhelmed and like you didn't even know what to do or where to start. What is it you wish people knew that could have helped you?
Really wish that teachers knew that, I'm working just as hard, if not harder than everyone else. But my executive functioning challenge is like going back to the up to 30% delay, make it so hard to keep up with everyone else. And it does lead to a sense of learned helplessness. And I think, know that I will need some extra support in, breaking big projects down so I can do them.
Right.
Yeah. And I think, a lot of people with ADHD have perfectionism because they're so afraid of getting in trouble that they'd rather just not turn something in. So making some assignments that aren't, so punitive, and thinking I make a rewards-based system than a punitive one.
Right. If you turn it in and you're going to get a bad grade or you're worried you're going to get a bad grade, then it's really scary. Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that perfectionism I know is common in so many people with ADHD and it starts back there in childhood. So, okay. I know this is something that I think is the biggest things for a lot of kids with ADHD. It's something parents worry a whole lot about. And that is, why don't you play with the other kids? And you told me, I'm trying to fit in, but no matter what I do, I can't connect. I just feel all alone. What would have been helpful for people to know? What do you wish they had known?
The way that a teacher treated me really connected with how much I was bullied in that class. And I think, when the teacher yells at you in front of all the other kids, it really just gives kids permission to bully you. And I feel like teachers sometimes don't realize how much of an impact their behavior has.
Right. Their example goes a long way.
Yeah, their example goes a long way. And I think, in that like ADHD, kids get a lot of sensory overwhelm, like going into large settings like a cafeteria or a playground or a birthday party, like you just kind of freeze up and, you don't really know what to do. So allowing us to meet with kids one-on-one or to find ways to help us meet kids with similar interests.
Yeah.
Really,
I think parents can go a long way there in helping set up like small play dates and things, make them structured a little bit. So there's things that you enjoy doing and feel comfortable with. Well, I know those are 5 big areas. And I love this quote. This is by one of my heroes personally, Carl Rogers, that people only seriously consider change when they feel accepted for exactly who they are. And I think so many of the things you talked about are you trying to be who you are and being either criticized or getting in trouble or being excluded. And I think this acceptance is probably a theme that really runs through a lot of pieces. I want to leave our contact information for both of us, Elyse. If you want to get in touch with us, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Both of us are very passionate about helping kids with ADHD feel successful. So please reach out to us. We have a list of our references here. If you're interested, reach out. We're happy to send these to you as well. But we just want to thank you all for joining and go help make the world a better place for kids with ADHD. Thanks so much.
The driving force behind starting the Monoceros Initiative is to provide real and accessible help to everyone in the ADHD community. Too much of what's available is either too expensive, not designed for everyone's unique experience, or just entirely incorrect.
Also, success as an ADHD professional is often reliant on who we know, which gives a huge advantage to those with privilege and makes it hard for emerging professionals to get their break. On top of that, those in the industry are often separated by occupation, with medical professionals gathering together, ADHD coaches gathering separately, therapists in yet another corner, and content creators often excluded entirely. We wanted to take a second and explain to you why we started the Monoceros Initiative and why it's important to each of us. So Jay and I were at the International ADHD Conference a few years ago, and we were sitting at dinner, and we were so excited, really, excited for just how fun it was to get together with a bunch of ADHDers and be inspired in our own, endeavors to help the community. But also frustrated with how hard it seemed to get together with people. And it was like, wow, we have to wait, once a year for all of us to kind of come to this conference.
There was just everything going on all at the same time. And there wasn't a lot of space for that social connection because there were talks going on at the same time. There was programming going on. Everyone was only there for a few days. Everyone was trying to like squeeze in so much, and all of our social batteries were being depleted. And it just felt like a lot. And we said, what if this was something that was just fun, where we could just get together, we could talk about what we're trying to do, we can network with other people who are doing similar things to us in a way that feels a lot more relaxed and fun instead of more work. And that's when we came up with Starboard, which is kind of the event that started this whole thing.
We were going back to our solopreneur lives, right? Where we were just going to sit in front of our home office computers by ourselves and try to motivate ourselves constantly to get stuff going and to do stuff for the community. And we realized how much more fun it was to combine our efforts. So this idea for a cruise kind of came up while we were looking at different places that we could do something. Since then, we've hosted 3 cruises.
When I attended my first Starboard cruise hosted by Ron and Jay, I knew they were onto something, and I wanted to get more involved in helping their vision become a reality.
ADHDvCon was, I think, always our second step, even when we were conceptualizing this, because at that conference, a lot of us were submitting talks for the first time, and it was really daunting because the talk selection process really gives a lot of privilege to the people who have talked before, who were already speakers, who had already established a name for themselves. And there was kind of no way for someone to break into that, to get feedback on what they were doing and how they could make it better. And so we said that we wanted to create an ADHD conference that allowed for improvement, that allowed new voices to be heard, and that gave everyone kind of like equal footing, that didn't prioritize prestige over content. That's how ADHDvCon was conceptualized, and I'm really proud of what we've put together as our first one.
I started off making content on TikTok and met so many great, brilliant individuals that care so much about helping the community. There's so many people out there that have the ability to reach people that need help and that need access. It's expensive to get help for your ADHD, and a lot of people don't have access to the money or the resources. They do turn to just going online and looking stuff up. And while there's loads of great information out there, it's also scary because there's a lot of misinformation out there. And it was kind of one of my initial reasons for wanting to do this, is to point out that you don't need to have a bunch of letters after your name, or you don't need to be someone that's given a ton of talks to have the ability to get your information and the things that you can do to help out there to people that need it.
I began coaching and sharing about ADHD on Instagram several years ago, and it quickly became clear to me that community and coaching both can make a huge impact for ADHDers. But something else became clear just as quickly. Access to both coaching and community is not accessible to many ADHDers. This needs to change.
And this access thing also spurred on a lot of different ideas for where we would like this nonprofit to go. We went on a Starboard cruise and posted some photos of it, and a lot of the response was not so complimentary due to the racial makeup of who was on that cruise. And that was really outside of our control at the time, because everyone was paying for their own cruises, their own trips, even us. Like, we were paying for our own trips. A part of that is just having the privilege to be able to pay for a cruise, even though it's way less expensive than going even to a conference. It was a fraction of the price of that, but even at that price, there are a lot of people who would be excluded from participating just because they don't have the means to do so. And so the nonprofit was started as a way for us to kind of level the scales a little bit and to allow us to get grants and fundraising efforts so that we could bring in more marginalized groups into these community building and career building activities that we're doing. And on that note, we also started talking about the access to coaching and the access to ADHD coaching. And there are so many people who come to me, I'm a woman of color, and I get a lot of consults from people who cannot afford ADHD coaching and need to get pro bono and sliding scale. And what ends up happening is with the cultural competencies, those individuals are going to other individuals like them that grew up in their communities, that grew up in the same culture. And a lot of times this pro bono and sliding scale opportunities are given, but at the cost to the coach. The coach is providing a service and getting less compensation for it. And it really is unfair that that has to happen. And so we thought, what if we used our funds to level the scales in that way too, to subsidize coaching programs so that coaches from those marginalized communities could provide their coaching services and not have to pay for it out of their own financial stability. And right now, no one is really doing that. And so we thought this was a great opportunity for the funds that go toward ADHD coaching and that go toward ADHD to really make a difference in the communities that could use it the most.
I've been working in healthcare for a large part of my career. And unfortunately, Black children are often underdiagnosed but misdiagnosed, which can delay proper treatment. Addressing these disparities require culturally sensitive healthcare, improved access to mental health services, and efforts to reduce stigma within our community.
We have big plans to deliver more access to the ADHD community, from providing free educational resources to putting on inclusive and community building events, to even subsidizing coaching programs for marginalized groups. But to make this vision a reality, we need your help.
Whether it's spreading the word, joining us for events, or contributing what you can financially, every bit of support makes a difference.
If you believe in what we're doing, widening representation, amplifying diverse voices, and making sure ADHD support is available to all, please consider supporting us.
We would love for you to join us on this mission and support our organization.
I'm honored to be a part of the Monoceros Initiative board, and I know with the support of the ADHD community, we can make an impact.
Thank you so much for being a part of this journey with us, and we hope you enjoyed ADHDvCon.
Hello and welcome to the Q&A for Shorts program number 4. I'm here with Dusty Chipura, who presented Advocating for Yourself as a Pregnant Person with ADHD. Elyse O'Connell and Diane McLean presented 5 Things Uniquely Wired Kids Wish You Knew. And Meredith Carter, Jalen, and myself, Ron Capalbo, 3 of the 4 members, board members of the Monoceros Initiative. So let's jump into questions. I want to start with Dusty. So if you've been watching the conference, people have talked about how I am a new father. And so recently was the partner of somebody who went through giving birth. And really, was such a scary experience going into it. And I just was wondering, have you had any clients, or maybe you can touch on clients that maybe either had a horror story happen to you and how you handled it, or something that went really well and something that you did that you thought, what is important for people to hear?
Yeah, I feel like there's lots of both.
So like, how much time do you have?
Yeah, so like I've had, I've heard everything from like, usually when we're working with people like as a doula, whether you're ADHD informed or not, we're talking about how to like, what to expect during the birth process, what kinds of things might come up. And Ron, you were mentioning before we started, like your doula kind of prepped you for that, like gave you a good sense of like what to expect. And so I've had some clients who've had a really, really good birth experience because they were like, okay, and then like this thing happened, and Dusty, like you told me that might happen, so I knew how to handle it. And that was really good. And I've heard the other side where like, I gave birth. I was, people were just sticking their hands in places. I didn't know what was going on. No one was telling me anything. It was horribly traumatic. So I've sort of heard the range. And unfortunately, like, I think like advocacy is really key. And also it depends a lot, I think, on the culture of healthcare where you're giving birth, right? If nobody's even telling you what's going on, how can you even, stop them and pause and go, hey guys, like, let's take a second here. So a lot of it, I think, does also come down to where you're giving birth and what their philosophy is. But yeah, I've definitely heard like the whole gamut.
Okay, let's jump to Elyse and Diane. So when it comes to kids with ADHD and the things that they kind of wish that you knew, what do you think is so important for that process for when these kids become adults, right? And how that affects them in their adulthood? And either one of you can take that or jump on it after.
Well, I'll just jump in real quick. I think, everyone on this call has been a kid. We've been that kid who has felt misunderstood and had people tell us to do things or talk to us in a way that wasn't helpful at all. And I think Elise's story is great because we can look back at our childhood from our adult perspective. But carrying that, Ross Greene is a psychologist. He's famous for saying all kids do well when they can. And when they can't, I think as a kid, you feel like something's wrong with you. But what we know, it's not a character flaw. It's an executive function challenge, and it's a missing skill. So I think the weight of carrying that all throughout your life, that you knew you messed up as a kid and you're a bad person, I think it just eats away at who we are. And I think it's important to know, even if you're an adult now, that you were doing the best you could, and it's not a character flaw. You're a perfectly wonderful human. You may have had some missing skills or executive function challenges, but that's not the same as, being a bad person or being broken.
Yeah, I think, Diane, you said that beautifully. And I worked at a crisis center for 6 years, and a lot of the adults, some, up to their 80s, like if they had ADHD or autism, I think everyone had a story of when they were in elementary school and when their, negative feelings about themselves started. So it's really core in that individual's mind, and it becomes their identity. And I know for me, when I first got diagnosed with ADHD, it took a lot of therapy work to slowly peel away a lot of the negative self-beliefs that started so young. And I was shocked how, young it did start.
I think it's so amazing how we, even as adults, don't know the language or what's happening, and imagine as kids, right? And I think that's what you were kind of talking about in your talk there. That's really great. So board, Jay, Meredith, me, Ron. So a lot of people, I've learned a lot about the Monoceros Initiative. What is it that you do individually, and what's your kind of background and what brought you here? Let's go with Meredith first.
All right, I'll kick it off then. I am an ADHD coach, creator, and writer. I have been working in this field for about 5 years now. What brought me to want to be a part of the Monoceros Initiative is through this work, it's so clear to me how your financial privilege or your proximity to skilled providers has a huge influence on how you experience life post-diagnosis with ADHD. Oftentimes, people are looking for resources, and resources like coaching that can make a huge difference are expensive and they're cost prohibitive for people. And not everyone is able to access the things that I was able to access to make my experience of life with ADHD better. And that became clear so quickly to me with the work that I'm doing. And when Ron and Jay started talking about these things and wanting to make a big difference in this area, I immediately was honored to be able to align with them.
Jay.
Hi, Jalen. I am the president of the Monoceros Initiative. I don't know if Meredith mentioned the titles, but president and co-founder of the Monoceros Initiative. I am an ADHD coach, a podcaster, an advocate, ADHD educator, and community builder. I co-founded the ADHD Women at Google Employee Resource Group when I was working there, and also started ADA's Asians with ADHD peer support group as well. I think what I bring to the Monoceros Initiative is perspective, and it's both in a positive and negative light around my experiences. I am a woman of color, and I am what I consider to be one of the lesser paid attention to minorities in the ADHD space. And that perspective gives me a lot of insight about kind of all of the forgotten groups that ADHD doesn't always pay attention to. And I want there to be more of a broad, kind of diverse perspective on ADHD that is given. And at the same time, I got my ADHD diagnosis while I was an employee at Google and had every resource. My diagnosis process was free. All my medication was free, like everything. I had so much privilege, and even privilege growing up, having the means to do a lot of extracurriculars and all the stuff that other people don't have access to. So I both come in here with this perspective of knowing what it's like to be kind of left behind by this, and also knowing that I have had a leg up that a lot of people haven't had access to. And so what I'm trying to do here, and what we are trying to do here, is to make it more inclusive, more diverse in perspective, but also level the scales and make it so I am not the only one who gets access to all of this stuff. It becomes more readily available to anyone.
Yeah, and I'm Ron. I'm a coach, educator, advocate, content creator. I got my start by making TikToks 3 years ago, and realizing that I wanted to do a lot more for the community. And so I'm an AAC accredited coach, and really most of my efforts, especially lately since having baby, almost all of my efforts have gone into the Monoceros Initiative because of kind of what it is we stand for. And kind of what I think I bring is a lot of different little things, a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of energy, hopefully. Hopefully I get it back soon when I get some sleep. But really, it was, me seeing that it was so difficult for so many great content creators that are out there to get any type of acknowledgement or to get their stuff seen, who had really great stuff, and then seeing things that kind of didn't deserve to be at the front of the line because they just happened to be a white dude like me, and so they get seen a little bit more often on social media, or they get a little bit more I guess exposure, and just seeing such inequities as far as that went. And then too, when you take a step back from the ADHD community and look at the people that struggle with ADHD, and you see these big organizations, and like I like to think of like the professional side of things, but in general, it's a lot of people that are doing the telling you what you should be doing. And then there's these people on the front lines. There's the coaches. There's the content creators. There's people that just aren't able to support themselves and educate the community. They're not able to run their solo business by themselves, and especially ones that come from marginalized communities, even more so. And there's not a ton, at least from what I've seen, a ton of support. There's little things, there's little like organizations that are like, oh, be a part of this that we have. And we really wanted to find a way to help highlight those voices and lift them up, and it not just be about who you are or what letters are after your name or how often you've been doing it. We want new and helpful content, and we want to help those people that are the educators that are kind of in the middle ground there that I feel like get left behind. So yeah, I think we were talking a little bit before. Diane, you were even asking Dusty a question. Do you have a question does anybody have a question for each other? Does anybody want to talk about things? I think all of us here kind of know each other and have this professional relationship. Is there anything that you found interesting with each other's presentations? Throwing you all on the spot right now.
I just in general, I was just so excited after day one, even to see the variety, to see the different kinds of styles. I thought it was so ADHD friendly. Like I sat there and watched 5, shorts in a row, and I didn't even faze me that I'd sat there for an hour. I was like glued to it. So I think you guys are onto something really awesome.
Oh, wow. I wasn't just talking about us. I'm just talking with people here, but thank you. That was really
But
nice.
in general, the presentations, it was just so interesting because you got to see such a wide variety and in a format that really was very, very accessible, I think. So
I actually have a question for Dusty. So what do you suggest for people who are pregnant, who have partners who are not as supportive of brain and self-advocacy in that way? Like, what if they're with a partner who's just like, just do it, just do it, just do it?
You guys asked me a question right as all the dogs started barking. Can we do someone else's question? We'll come right back to that because these dogs are going nuts. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
So somebody else asked a different question. I'll loop back.
I know we all got. Let me go ahead and ask Elyse. Elyse, you obviously wanted to talk about your experience as a child. Is it something that you've had to kind of find yourself healing? I know when people tell me, when I'm like, man, I wish I could go back and hug my younger self, and they tell me, well, you can do it now. Is that something that you found to be helpful to kind of look back and do that?
It was helpful. And, interestingly enough, my first presentation as an ADHD coach, I had shopped around a few different presentations that were more general. And then I did a lot of inner child work myself because I was a mental health counselor, and a lot of my friends were like, yeah, that's important. So then I was like, should I share this really personal one where I'm like talking to my inner child? And I did, and I ended up presenting it to my district where I went to school and was a child. And
Wow.
It was like such a full circle moment. And everyone was very emotional, but it did feel very therapeutic to go back to the place where, a lot of the trauma had happened and been like, hey, I'm going to prevent other kids from going through it. But it was very scary. I got up there and my ADHD crisis brain kicked in and I did it. But yeah, it's been an experience, and it wasn't, I think as an adult, acknowledging how painful those experiences are. I didn't realize how much emotion was sitting in me about those. Yeah.
Dusty, you want to answer that question with your friend?
Thank you. I'm ready. That was such funny timing, you guys, because it's been dead silent in here. And as soon as you finished your question, Jay, someone knocked on the door and 3 dogs started barking and children started yelling. Guys, you got to be quiet. I'm working here. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So further to your question, Jay, I think what I would say is that I think the answer to that, it starts a lot further back in pregnancy, right? We would hope that these days there's enough good resources out there in terms of prenatal class and books and resources that both partners would want to be engaged. So with that, I mean, that's what we hope. And then also, like, that's not always realistic, right? That's not always the ideal. So I'd say, like, if you can be honest with yourself and you know your partner, and you know that maybe you don't have the kind of partner who is going to be able to, like, back you up for whatever reason, right? Like, that might not be because they're, you know, anything bad. It could be that they have their own limitations, disability, maybe they work out of town, who knows, right? I think you definitely want to arrange support for yourself in advance. And that's what a doula does, right? Guys, you need to be quiet, please. Thank you. We don't always have, like, the financial resources to access, like, doulas, but there's, like, training doulas, just like there's training coaches. You can have, you know, a friend who's maybe gone through labor already to advocate for you. I think it's, you know, you're going to be in a very vulnerable moment. So you want to make sure that whoever's with you is someone that you feel really comfortable with, and just making sure that you're lining up somebody else to be there with you. And I mean, if you have to be alone and if you have to advocate for yourself, we hope that, like, that acronym will be easy enough to remember, right? Yeah, I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, it's not an easy question to answer, because
Nuanced,
like, yeah,
right?
what do you
don't know
do?
the situation.
Right. Yeah. So,
And not everyone even has a partner, right?
exactly.
So I think my advice to pregnant people with ADHD, you know, it's not super different from sorry, there's children. We can't make them be quiet. We've asked several times. The royal we. Now I'm had, as you can see, in the hopes that it will be quieter. It's not. I think my advice to pregnant people with ADHD is really just like the same advice that I would give anybody with ADHD, which is, like, ask for help, right? Guys, can you please, guys, shh. We need we need other people, right? Pregnancy especially is not the time to, like, self-isolate and to be like, let me do everything myself. And the good thing is, I think that, like, pregnancy is a time when people are more willing to ask for help. They're more willing to let themselves be helped. Whereas when we're just being our ADHD selves, sometimes we don't want to let people in because we feel like we don't deserve it, or maybe, like, what we're struggling with is our fault. But, like, I think it's sort of universally and sort of culturally accepted that ADHD is a time, or pregnancy is a time where you can ask for help and where you can set boundaries. So start early, right? Find the people who are going to help you. Like, if you don't have a partner, or if your partner's not supportive, or your partner can't be there, like, find someone that you would feel comfortable having with you in the hospital, and get them in there.
I love that.
That's perfect.
Thank you, guys. That's all the time we have for questions.
One thing real quick, just want to point out that today is Ron's birthday. Today is Ron's birthday.
Yay.
So happy birthday, Ron. Thanks for being
guys.
here with us.
I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. That's not entirely true, but it's pretty true. It's pretty true. This has been a really great birthday. I'm glad to spend it with all of you. Thank you, everyone, for attending VCon. This is the final part of the third day. It was wonderful. We couldn't have asked for really a better turnout, or the way that things went so smoothly, and we've gotten such great feedback already. As Jay has already mentioned in the chat, all live stream replays are available on our YouTube channel afterward. If you have any questions for any of the presenters that you've seen over the last 3 days, shoot us an email at Monoceros Initiative. But also, just a reminder, one last time, that if you found ADHDvCon to be helpful and you have the means to do so, please make a tax-deductible donation to the Monoceros Initiative. The link to donate's in our description of the live stream. Follow us on Instagram. Follow everyone else on Instagram. We've tagged them all in our posts. You can find all their information on our website. And until next time, thank you all, and have a great evening.
Thanks for being here.